this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the gem city of Dayton, Ohio. As a proud sponsor of this episode, we are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs by providing the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us this summer for a glaze mixing workshop with our very own low-fire expert, Ben Carter, July 24th through the 26th. Visit CornellStudioSupply.com to sign up. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters by potters.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection features photos of 4,500 objects made by over 1,250 artists. Each object has at least 3 high-quality images that can be downloaded and used with no permission required, making them a great source of inspiration for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 572 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today, Chelsea McMaster returns to the show to talk about her research into Antiguan ceramic traditions. In 2024, she received a Fulbright-National Geographic Award for her project Wadadli Folk. The project aims to preserve the techniques and histories of Antigua's traditional potters. In this interview, we talk about the makers who continue to craft pots for open-fire cooking, the connection to West African ceramic technique, and how her research informs her own studio practice in ceramic sculpture. If you'd like to find out more, you can check her out on Instagram or go to her website, chelseamcmaster.art. Before we get to this interview, I wanted to thank the folks that have been supporting this show over on Patreon. That includes Bree Larson and Keith French. If you'd like to become a member of the Red Clay Rambler community, you will get access to the Tales from the Vault podcast feed, which features all the old classic episodes that are no longer available on major podcast apps. You can join that community for as little as $5 a month over at patreon.com/redclayrambler. Also wanted to plug that I will be out at Cornell Studio Supply at the end of this month, July the 24th through the 26th, for a hands-on workshop where we're going to be doing low-fire glaze mixing. We're going to be researching and looking into a lot of the glazes that are in my low-fire book. And then we're also going to do a low soda in the rocket kiln. So if you're interested in that, you can join us for that weekend. If you'd like to register today, you can go to cornellstudiosupply.com. or check out the link in the show notes. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Can you talk about how the West African influence of potters that were brought as enslaved people to Antigua, how that continued on in the traditions of Antiguan pottery?
I think it's really interesting because there's no definitive records of what was going on during the time, and a lot of stuff was lost as well. But what we do know is that on what the assumption is that there were some plantations that had people that had that knowledge, and they were able to find clay on the island, and in their downtime, enslaved women would make work, and sometimes they were allowed to go and sell in the markets on the weekends. And so it kind of, they had to make their own pots and supplies sometimes. And so, because there were some records of what they were allotted as enslaved people, like clothing and utensils and stuff like that. It really wasn't a lot. And so they had to make a lot of it on their own. And pottery was one of those things that happened. I don't have any like concrete evidence of what areas on the island that continued to happen. But what we do know is that Seaview Farm was um, kind of has always had it in some way. Um, and so that was what was happening during slavery, but towards emancipation, um, Antigua didn't have like the indentured labor system. And so there was this period of time where it was a little chaotic. And Natasha Lightfoot published a book about this time in Antigua and how, because the island didn't have, there was no structure to kind of like the breaking away of the slavery system, there was this weird time where nothing actually changed. And there was like a slow movement of people away from the plantation systems. And there was like a lot of influence from the churches on the island who were helping people. If they converted, then they would get help to maybe like build a house in one of the free villages that were being established. And what happened for those people who were able to move off the plantations was that the men still worked on the plantations, but the women took care of the home. And the women who were taking care of the home weren't just like doing household things, but they were also working in grounds. So like these gardens, they were like actually planting crops to feed their families, but they were also like the women who had skills were also making pottery and we're able to kind of build some economic wealth that way. Like, so there's this like really interesting time period where women were just able to really establish themselves because they had the skills. They knew how to do pottery. And for a time, the only way that people on the island could have things to fill the homes that they were now slowly being able to own themselves was to get household utensils and pottery from the people in Seaview Farm who were making those pots. And so they were the people who were like supplying the island of like newly emancipated people. Like that was where you were able to actually have things that you could own in your home. So whether it's like storage vessels, water jars, cooking pots, um, all sorts, anything that they could like figure out how to make, it was kind of coming from there. So I think because it was really this like cottage industry that helped to establish um like that economic freedom for women. It stayed around for a really long time. And it's only been recently that it has started, I think within the last 20 years, that the decline really began to happen as kind of like the island's progressing. There were like in towards, I would say maybe towards like the 50s or 60s, where people were able to like maybe have their own stoves in their homes and refrigerators and stuff. A lot of that, the use for those that pottery wasn't had just became a little less. And so now it's more of a if if somebody wants to have a coal pot or like well most homes would probably have one still or they'd have one or two cooking pots or if you are the type of person who like likes that traditional style of cooking they would probably still purchase a lot of that pottery for that purpose, but outside of that it's more of a um I don't know, it's moved from this very hyper functional and um like we're buying these things because we need them to somebody will have a pot that belonged to their grandmother that's just sitting on their shelf. So it's it's really interesting where it's at the tradition or like the view of the practice has shifted um within the scope of like I don't know, the past 100 years, except I don't think that people have began to look at it as a like a valued art form. I think they still see it as something that's become obsolete. So like the mindset hasn't quite changed. And I think that is something that has kind of added to the decline of the importance of it within society, or even the knowledge of it that is even still around.
I was thinking about clay as technology because what makes the clay, like the material, it's the clay itself on Antigua can take direct flame. And that sometimes, like, as someone who works in clay, like that doesn't always happen. So
Hmm.
when you talk about coal pots, it is literally, it's not I was trying to think of a visual way to describe it, but it is literally a holder of coal underneath another pot that is a cooking surface. So it's almost like a clay camp stove. Like, how would you describe
Yes,
it?
I've always described it as a coal-powered cooking stove. So it's like, and there, even like for a time, I was trying to figure out the origins of it. That is also a really complicated history as well. But yeah, it's like, I really like a short. Let me see if I can describe it. It is a cylindrical, I would say it's a pot. I'm gonna call it a pot, right? So imagine it's a cylindrical pot that begins at the base and then opens up into a bowl-like structure towards the top. And then there are grills or holes inside of that bowl structure that leads down into the cylinder of the bottom and has an opening for airflow. So it also has handles. It also has some handles around the rim of your bowl, the bowl top. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's a basic description because depending on the island that you're getting your cold pot from, the form is going to be a little different. The shape is going to change. A cold pot from Jamaica is very different from a cold pot from Antigua. And when we're talking about, I mean the clay made ones. Formally, they have some differences. I feel like the ones that you would find in St. Lucia kind of have like a taller. They've got a taller neck. I'm going to call it a neck than the ones that you would find in Antigua. So like it's really interesting to see how this one thing changes throughout the region.
I would love to know the geology. And actually, if you know this, please tell me more about this. How clays that can take a direct flame are existing on all these different islands. Because it's not like Jamaica and Antigua are right beside each other. Like we're talking about distances that are essentially, I guess, volcanic mountaintops. I wish I knew more about the geology. So can you tell me more?
Okay. So, I mean, I'm supposed to I like learned this in elementary school, and I think it's so okay. What I do know about Antigua is that it has a lot of limestone. These islands are all like most of them, I guess, are you know volcanic, or they came about because of some kind of volcanic eruption. And so I don't actually know. I did get very scientific thing with a lot of symbols and numbers that I was like, oh, this is above my scope of knowledge. So like I didn't really, particularly pay attention to exactly what it is, but like coming from like a clay person's perspective, I think I don't I really don't know it. They take heat really well.
Well, in the southern United States, and actually in Southwest United States, it's mica. Mica is what's in the clay that also makes it have this amazing thermal shock resistance.
Yes.
Is that what is happening there? Like when you look at the clay, when you touch the clay, is it have that kind of shininess that mica has?
It doesn't. No. What it so like there are two types of these little stones that you would find in them, right? So sometimes you would get these like you find one or two larger stones that the potters usually pick out, but there is like a kind of black um stone that if you are able to pull it, it's so small, but if you squeeze it, you can crush it with your fingers.
Huh.
It's like, so I don't know if it's like a type of shale or something, but it's there are these like little tiny balls that are inside of it. Um, and then there's also a white one as well that is a little different texture, but it's also in there. And depending on how you process the clay, so the because the potters process the clay by hand, they don't get those two types, they don't get them out. They stay in the clay body. The larger ones, they will take out because they will like affect the finished piece. And sometimes they will like they don't take the heat well. So they'll pick those stones out, but then there are these like really fine particles in them. And I don't know, it's not shiny. It doesn't have that same quality that mica does. So I honestly have no idea why. But I was able to test the clay because I assumed that it was a low fire clay, but it's actually a high heat clay. It was fine at cone 10 when I tested it. Um, and it is when you look at it, when it's in green, it's like this gray color. But when you fire it, it gets like a kind of orange hue to it. And the higher you fire it, the darker that orange gets. And so I was the first time I tested, I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I think that also has something to do with it, that it is a high fire clay body that has high heat resistance that is being fired really low. And so I don't know, I think it's just able to, like, because it's not being fired, like I don't know that it's getting very far past quartz inversion, if it is getting there with that with the flame and the how fast the firing is. I think that might have something to do with the fact that it can keep being heated up and down, especially the ones that are touching fire. Um, I think that might have something to do with it because before I was able to go back to Antigua, I was making coal pots in undergrad, and that was something that I was trying to figure out. It was like how are we able to make pots? And I was firing them at different temperatures to see um, if I could cook with it.
How did
At the
that go?
time, not not
Not
well,
well.
because I did not have that knowledge of like what even flameware was, and so I was just like going about and like making stuff and seeing what happened and testing different clay bodies. And I think the answer might be that I was firing them too high. And then like adding that fire again was just like not, it was just not happy. So one day I will probably figure out the scientific reason why.
But one of the things you analyzed was individual mark making. So I'm thinking about like the flower pots, the larger flower pots that are made now. There's a very specific patterning that happens that shifts in the archaeological record from the pre-colonial time to colonial time to now. So can you talk about that kind of tradition of, I don't know how to describe it, like finger decoration or like carved decoration that's on the surfaces at the top of the pots?
It is a finger decoration. I'm not exactly sure when it started happening, but it is like once the pot is finished, they will you finish the rim, it's nice and smooth, and then they will use like the side of their index finger and do indents around on the rim. And then once that's done, they will go on the side and use like the thumb and just like do imprints in a pattern around the top. So it is just pinching, basically. Um, and it's really interesting because that's the only form of like actual decoration or like surface design that happens. Um, and I could not get an answer from the Potters as to why, as to why it's done. But I think for them, and what makes the distinguish like when they do that type of mark making versus not is like what the object is. And so for in their minds, flower pots are a decorative object. And so it needs a little extra It needs a little extra thing to be, just a little prettier, as opposed to the strictly functional cooking pots, the cold pot, the bowls, the wash basins. Like those are very much like this is for utility. So it doesn't need anything extra. It just needs to work. And so that's how they make the distinction. Um, in terms of why or how it came about, I couldn't get any definitive answers about that. But there has been a lot of like archaeological research that's been done on the island, and one of the archaeologists, Desmond Nicholson, who started one of the founders of the museum on the island, he had he began to record some records of the pottery that they were excavating that wasn't indigenous origin, and so they were kind of separating it, and it really you really begin to see it towards the beginning of the colonial history of it. And from his records, he was able to kind of carbon date pots that would have come from the African continent, and those decorative things that were more geometric and lined. And then also, and I think, and his research kind of ended there, but I wanted to kind of pick up where that left off, because I think a lot of the pots that um he was dating was like dated from around like the 17th, 18th century. And so for me, like this method of decorating being, I don't really see a difference between this surface design that was coming from the continent and this surface design that kind of like sprang up on the island once the potters of Seaview Farm were beginning to like really, you know, get into and into the group of their making. I just wanted to kind of add it to the current list of other things. And so outside of that, I don't really think I have very many answers. And that's one of the things that's like, I don't know if it's been difficult, but I've been like just come to accept that, I see these things, I make a record of them, and I try my best to kind of like decipher, but I really don't have a whole lot of answers. I wasn't able to find very many answers for a lot of the questions that I had. Because I do know that there are like um like the Felona potters um, in West Africa, the surface designs that they use are they're not always like incised. Sometimes they are kind of like pressed on, or they will use tools to add that pattern on the outside of the pots, but those are also passed down generationally. And so you're able to kind of distinguish where pots are coming from, what families making them based on the patterns. Um, but it's also really, and I wondered if maybe there was some connection there, but it was a situation where like everybody was using the same pattern. So it was like everybody in the village, they were like, sometimes the potters might take liberties with maybe the way how they finish a form, but the decorative method is all the same. So it's like they are coming from one family in a way, which is also a really interesting way to look at it. I mean, not very scientific, but
It's interesting because you talk about that you don't know the answer, but you have the curiosity to try to find it. And we should have started with that. You went down there on a Fulbright because you grew, you're Antiguan, but you also came to the US, did ceramic education, are an active maker and a sculptor. Then you go back as a researcher. So I think that story is also a big part of this, is that you have the curiosity and the determination and the desire to do the paperwork to get the Fulbright, because I know it is not easy to get one.
no, no, it is not. It is not. So I lost myself to ceramics in undergrad. And I was like, okay, this is it. I feel like this is what I'm going to do. But for a very long time, I was like, I don't know what my work is going to be about. Like, what am I making? Why am I making? These are questions that like really plagued me. Um, And so like I wanted to kind of like start with who I am. Um, and that led me to kind of discovering the tradition in Antigua, like not knowing that it was even a thing is kind of mind-boggling to me. Which I don't know, it was quite upsetting because when I asked my parents, they're like, "Oh yeah, that is a thing. It's, it's right over there." Like literally the house that I grew up in, it's a 5-minute drive. The village is a 5-minute drive from where I grew up, and I had no idea. I had no idea. And it's just kind of like you go through your daily routine, you got school, you do this, blah, 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 and it's like there is just like very little education about the history, like outside of the colonial history, there's very little education given to locals about the history of the island itself. And so I don't know, unless it's something that's been in your family, it's just not knowledge that's shared. Um, and so I was really determined to go back. I needed to go back because it's like I can't be studying ceramics from like all over the world and not know about the one from where I come from. And so it was really important for me to go and learn. And then the urgency of it became really clear once I started doing my research and I realized how the numbers of the potters were declining. And so when I realized that, like, okay, I think what are the statistics? So like in 2008, there were still about 20 of them that were still making actively in Seaview Farm, and now there's only two of them that are making actively. There's still like one or two within families who will, get up one day and be like, okay, I'm going to make something today. But um, there's only really, I think, two that are still making every day, and like it's like a part of their practice. And so I was like, this is something that is really urgent. And so it became less important for me to go and learn, but really imperative for me to go and make sure that this knowledge was um, recorded in some way, and from the perspective of a maker, because there has been research that's been done from the archaeological perspective, from the, like anthropological perspective, but there really isn't much details from like as a maker, the questions that I wanted to know, I couldn't find any answers for online. And so I knew I had to go, I had to go and talk to them to find those answers. And so it kind of shifted from like a my greed of wanting this knowledge to trying to be an active participant in saving the tradition in some way.
Am I right in thinking that you also, post-research, went back to the islands to teach the art teachers in the schools about clay making as a way to continue this tradition?
So it all happened while I was there. So I was there for it's supposed to be 10 months. I ended up staying for an extra month or two, but a part of the project, like it was a two-part project where the first was me going, learning, documenting as much as I can. But then I also wanted to figure out like I don't think it would have been right to just record this knowledge and then put it aside. Like there had to be some part of it that figured out how to keep it going. And so what I wanted to do was to find people who were interested in learning and connect them to the potters that were still making. So there would be some kind of like new blood that was going into this. Because I think one of the reasons why the decline happened is because it's a matrilineal tradition. And so people learn from their mothers and grandmothers, and it stays in the family. And so if you're not from one of those families, you probably wouldn't know about it. And so I thought it would be, or if you weren't from the village, you probably wouldn't know about it, um, especially if you're from a younger generation. So I wanted to be able to find ways to get more people interested in it. Um, but there had to be a way because these women are older. They're like they they can't like um kind of take time away from their practice to sit and teach other people. And so it was I had to find a way to kind of proliferate the information. And I know that there are, I thought the art teachers teaching the art teachers would have been a way to do it because ceramics is something that had been in the education system maybe 2 or 3 generations ago. I have friends whose parents learned when in school because there was a teacher who was probably from one of those families who taught it in the schools, but like as that person retired, it kind of went away. And so if there is, I felt like if I could get it into the curriculum of the art system in some way, then that would be an easy way to kind of have it still exist in some form. And so I did a series of workshops towards the end of my grant, working with art teachers who were interested in kind of implementing it into their curriculums. So these were high school art teachers, they're public school art teachers. And the way how the system, I guess, like the school system is that they, I guess, their form of like SATs, their CSEC exams towards the end of high school, art is a subject that the students can take, and they get to choose a medium. And so if there is a student who's interested in ceramics, I wanted to be able to give the art teachers the knowledge of how to kind of guide that student along without facilities, without kilns, without, like, here's where you go find the clay, here's how you process it, here's the decorative material, here's how you fire. Like, I wanted them to be able to like use that traditional knowledge as a way to impart the knowledge, but still work within the confines of the public school system. Like being able to work without having that extra funding. So it was really important for me to not just record the information, but to also teach it, but also help them understand how they can sustain a practice there without needing money or like all the facilities to get it done.
Part of this is finding a new market, like a current 2026 market for the objects that the kids or the artists can make. So what is the market like? Who's buying the work now that it's not purely utilitarian?
I think the bulk of it is just like locals. Locals who are still using the pottery in some way. But then there's also hotels who want to buy like local made work. So a lot of those larger plant pots, you will see them on um, different hotel, just like around. And the women will get like orders for them, like they want like 10 of those giant planters, and it'll be, I think, and then also there are really rich people who have really fancy homes in the hills who are also really interested in buying local art. So they will get orders from them as well. There has been, I think back in the day, maybe like 10 or maybe 15 years ago, a lot of the market was tourism, but the tourism system has changed so much now, where now it's mostly cruise ships that are coming in, and that is limiting the range of how far people are willing to go because they only have like maybe a day there. So to get them out to the village to be able to buy from the potters locally, that ability has diminished somewhat within the last couple of years because the system of how tourism has been kind of working is also shifting. And so the market is at this weird place where it's not really going anywhere for the traditional pottery. There are contemporary potters there who like there's about four or five of them on the island who've got their studios, they've got their kilns, they'll make the work, and they're also kind of selling to hotels and different, but they will be able to take their work to the town or have like a little shop in the port area where people will be able to see that work. So there is this difference where the contemporary pottery is doing okay, but the traditional one is not, it's kind of stagnant in terms of like where the market is.
Yeah, and I think this research, I've just been thinking about the idea of a diaspora, because this is the book, you're in the book that Mulaney Barnett wrote called Crafted Kinship, and it talks a lot about the Caribbean diaspora in general. And what I like is that she's talking to people in London, she's talking to people in New York, talking to you, talking to people all over. But there's this idea that like there is a Caribbean connection that is now global. But for it to be global, that means those artists had to leave. And you
Yes.
yourself left, you know? When you left the island to go seek education elsewhere, how did that change the way you thought about your sense of home? And how do you think that informs the work you make now?
That's a really good question. And that's also something that I was asked while I was researching and kind of really pushing to get people kind of back into it. And they're like, oh, it's fine, you'll do it. And I'm like, this this is an impossible task for one person to do. But at the same time, I'm like, I mean, I would love to go back and set up a studio. And that is like something that I do plan to do in the next 30 years, you know, but it is hard to do because there's nothing set up. Like I would have to start from the ground, which is something that becomes a little difficult. Like it's hard to start an industry on your own, you know, or to like sustain an industry on your own. Even that, I don't know, that feels like kind of like grandiose of me to even like consider. But like I'm like, hmm.
Well, what I'm thinking is that as a young artist that did leave the island,
Mhm, mhm.
what are the things you took with you? And I'm talking about internal aesthetic things. Like, what are the things you took with you? But then also, do you feel some sense of responsibility to bring what you then learned back to the island? And I think you do in a way. You just said like eventually you do think about coming back and setting something up.
Internally, I think that might be, what do I take with me? I'm still trying to find that because something that I do think about when I'm working is who I'm talking to. And once I begin to break that down as I'm making something, I begin to see like how many directions it can go. Just because of like how many different, like I'm somebody from the Caribbean who is also Black living in America. And so when I make something, there are lots of different, I guess, audiences that um, the work could be speaking to. And this is also something I'm trying to figure out is like what I don't know what my work looks like when I'm talking to somebody from Antigua. I haven't figured that out yet. Um, and that's something that I wanted to try to do while I was there was to figure out what that would look like. I was talking to a lot of people because in a similar way where there is this, I don't know if this dissonance is the right word with like what from like for some reason like the way people view the traditional pottery just like hasn't changed. It hasn't evolved over time, and so it's always something that is of the past. People from home see my work, they're like, oh, that's so pretty. And then it ends there. So I'm like, what do I still haven't quite figured out what I put in the work that immediately they're like, oh, this takes me home. I don't know. I still don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, and how do you get it so that they see themselves in your work? Which is such a big topic for artists is like, how do we
Yeah.
both represent place, but also literally have the object carry place with it?
Yes. Yeah. And so for me, I guess my cop out has been that I'm using the traditional methods and aesthetic. But also like for the regular person who again isn't a part of that tradition or knows of that tradition, it doesn't really mean anything to them. And so in terms of like subject matter, I'm still really working to figure out what that is.
Well, I wonder though, if we had this interview 30 years from now, if the answer would be different. Because I do think there is also a timeline in the life of artists that's long. You know, I remember talking to Pete Pennell years ago, and he said he was in his 50s before he made work that felt like his. And I was like, well, shit, if Pete Pennell thinks that, then I'm fine. The fact that I don't feel like I always understand what's going on is normal.
I hope so. I mean, I know I do. I get it. I'm like, I think you really have to live. You have to keep living to get there. And it's something that I'm reminded of every time I just kind of sit back and think about where I am or where I feel like my work is currently. So I'm still working on.
No, that's honest.
I'm going to be thinking about your question for a very long time.
Okay, good. Well, the last thing I wanted to talk about is that you have now done all this research. How do you think, what form can the research take so that a lot of people can get it? So, for instance, I read a paper that you wrote after the Fulbright that was about this. But what is the next sort of layer of carrying the information out to more people? What form do you think it'll take?
I would love for it to be a book. I've been putting it out into the universe that is like in my 10-year plan because I don't want it to just be Antigua story. I'm also really interested in spreading to the different islands just to see, I guess, the shifts and the similarities and how those are also evolving and changing. And so I guess my ultimate goal would be to have a book that will have this information, the like the making information, the firing information, but also the oral histories of the people who are making, because I feel like I don't think the information has life without the oral histories, like I haven't quite decided like exactly what that looks like, but I think it has to be all of them for it to feel complete. So that's going to happen in the next 10 years. But currently, what I have is, so I have like a short docu-style video that has an interview of one of the potters talking through her process and giving a little bit of her oral history as she's making a pot. And also, it also shows some footage from the workshops with the art teachers and the group firing that we did. Um, and so that is something that I am looking for a place to premiere at some point in the near future. I'm currently working on applications for that to go out somewhere, but all of the information is going to be housed on a website that I'm also working on. Yeah, so I'm my goal is to have a database, just like an open database that has this information, whether it is the making methods, the firing methods, or the pot forms as best as I can, because a lot of it is coming from stories and descriptions, especially for the pots that are not being made anymore. So that database would have that information as well. My goal is to keep learning, to record, but also to educate as much as possible, because what I don't want is for like in the next 30 years to have this knowledge, this tradition gone, and there's another maker like me who really wants this knowledge and like has nowhere for it to go. And so I want it to be available to the people who live in Antigua, but also open to anybody else who's interested in this information as well.
Well, if people want to talk to you about this, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
You can find me or visit my website. You can shoot me a message there. It's chelseamcmaster.art, or you can just, send me a message on Instagram. It's going to be the easiest way to get in contact with me.
Well, thanks so much, Chelsea. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Chelsea for coming on the show. I appreciate her sharing her research. And if you didn't listen to the episode I did with her and Stephen Earp back in March, you should definitely check that out as she talks more about her own studio practice. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art and Cornell Studio Supply. If you or your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor, you can get in touch at talesofaredclayrambler.com. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.